What's going on, guys, and welcome back to Gran Turismo 6 and round 3 of the Manufacturer Championship. Today we are at the Nurburgring GP circuit and we have 600 pp cars, starting off with Ferrari. Now for Ferrari I went with the 458 Italia because I know this is a pretty cool car, and you know it's one of my favourite, if not my favourite Ferrari. And yeah, it wasn't terrible. However, it was pretty slidey out of a lot of the corners. Probably one of the hardest cars, if not the hardest car to drive out of all these, which I wasn't really expecting. And also putting power down with this car was a bit of an issue. It just didn't like putting the power down, and yeah, it wasn't great really because this was the first car I drove around the track, and I kind of started off with this car. Starting off with not a particularly nice car was not great. Next up was BMW, and I went for the M5, the 2005 M5. This is the highest PP car that I could get for BMW before getting into race cars. I didn't want to use a race car because I felt like that was kind of unfair. And sadly this didn't quite get up to 600 pp. It did, however, get up to 596 pp, so it's pretty close. And this thing was very fast. Coming from the Ferrari, this thing was a lot faster accelerating, and it held to the road a lot better, and I was actually really impressed with this car for being, I mean, it's only 4 pp down on the Ferrari, on the rest of the cars, but yeah, it did very well. Up next was Mercedes-Benz, and we went for the SLS AMG. It was basically between this and the SLR McLaren. I decided to go for this because this was kind of, I felt like with the SLR I didn't really have much room to do anything. With this I had 40 pp to play with, so I thought it was pretty good. Now I'm not a massive fan of the SLS AMG, you probably know this, I've said it a few times. However, I was very happy with how this car drove. This car drove really nicely. I was actually quite surprised. I've driven it in the past, it's not been the nicest thing to drive, but yeah, this was the best car I'd driven so far out of these three, and yeah, I was very happy with it. Up next was Chevrolet with the Corvette Z06 C6, and this was a bit of an interesting car really. The gearing was quite long in this car, which to be honest I think actually was pretty decent. It worked fairly well for this car, and the cornering was actually a lot better than I expected with this car. I mean, it gets through the chicane here fairly easy. We get a little bit bounced up on the curb, but yeah, it gets turned really well, and I was pretty surprised about that with this car. Very nice drive, very quick, and yeah, all round I was actually quite surprised with this car and how it went. And it was pretty good. Next up was Audi, and I went for the R8 5.2 FSI Quattro. This is, I believe, the V10 Audi R8, and this did okay. I put turbos on this car. I think I don't think it had a low RPM turbo, I'm pretty sure, but it wasn't bad. It was a little bit slidey, which I wasn't expecting from a four-wheel drive car, to be honest. This was possibly a little bit harder to drive than the 458, which is interesting. You'd get oversteer, you'd also get bits of understeer. It wasn't the best, but wasn't terrible. But yeah, probably one of the worst cars. Next up was Aston Martin, and I went for the 177. I actually wanted to go for the V12 Vantage, however I could not quite get that up to 600 pp, so I thought I should probably really, I knew this car could get up there. I only had 20 pp to work with, so I basically only, I think, did pretty much full-on weight reduction and put a sports computer in it. I'm pretty sure that's all I could do with this car, and I was actually very surprised. I'm not a big fan of the 177, but this car was very nice to drive. Once again, this was a big surprise. With like these really big, quite long cars like the SLS, this and the SLS actually did a hell of a lot better than I expected, and I was pretty happy with the Aston Martin. Up next is the almighty Nissan GTR Spec V. This is an awesome car. It always is. It's four-wheel drive, so traction was pretty good. As you can see, they did get a little bit of a wiggle on, but it was a fairly nice car. The main downside to this car, I mean, the cornering was pretty decent, maybe a little bit of understeer at times, which could have let it down a little bit. It wasn't the best through this fast section, however, it wasn't too bad getting it slightly up on two wheels there. Yeah, it lacked a bit of power. This didn't have quite as much power. It was one of the least powerful cars of them all, which was one of its main downsides really. But apart from that, yeah, it was pretty good. And finally we have Ford, and it is the Ford GT 2005. I've never been the biggest fan of the Ford GT. It's just not really my thing, and as you can see with this car, it doesn't drive well. I think this is probably the hardest car I had to drive, followed by pretty closely by the Audi and then the Ferrari. This thing really struggled to stay in a straight line. It was very slidey. It was kind of a twitchy slidey though. Like, it wasn't like a slide where you'd just constantly slide. You could get it back again, but it did snap out, and it wasn't great. However, acceleration was great, and so was the speed. We go on to the times. We have Chevrolet in first, then Aston Martin, followed by Mercedes, BMW, Ford, Nissan, Ferrari, and at the bottom Audi. Wasn't too surprised about the Audi, it just didn't really feel particularly great. And we go to the final standings. These are the final standings of the whole championship. BMW ends up taking first place, overtaking the Ferrari, because the Ferrari did not have a particularly good race in that last one. It drops to second, so we have the BMW with 36 points, Ferrari with 34, Chevrolet moves up to third in 32 points, Mercedes-Benz with 30 points in fourth, fifth place the Aston Martin with 28 points, and then we kind of drop down a little bit. We have a draw for sixth with Nissan and Ford both on 20 points, and in last place Audi did drop quite a bit down with 16 points. Audi had a pretty good start, coming third I believe in the first round, but they dropped down a lot in previous ones. But anyway, that is it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed, please go ahead, like and subscribe. Comment on what other videos you want to see on the channel on any games, and I'll hopefully get round to them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.